back in US and in India. We are here again with a lot of enthusiasm in the wonderful weather back in India on the discussion about reinventing professionalism with liberal arts in the current times, along with our esteemed partners from Salisbury University and Dean PDEU for liberal arts. I'm extremely pleased to introduce the speakers for today. The first speaker, Dr. Brian. Dr. Brian earned his PhD in Spanish language and Latin American literature. He currently serves as Assistant Provost for the International Education at Salisbury University. He has served on multiple international educational leadership boards in the US, including the American Council on Education Commission for Internationalization and Global Engagement. His most recent publications are focused on comprehensive internationalization at public comprehensive universities in the US. Our second speaker today would be Dr. Chrys. Dr. Chrys is the Associate Dean at the Fulton School of Liberal Arts and also the Professor of Communication. Her Salisbury University leadership position have included Director of the Youth Innovation Academy, Co-Director of the Office of the Undergraduate Research and Creative Activity, Faculty Senate President, and Beckon Scholarship Scholar in Residence off campus. She is currently the President of the International Leadership Association's Women and Leadership, Second Vice President of the Maryland Communication Association, and past President of the Popular Culture Association in the South. She has 35 academic publications and 50 popular press articles on communication, leadership, and culture. She earned SU Award for the President's Diversity for Faculty Student Government Association Outstanding Faculty, Alumni Faculty Appreciation, Outstanding Research Mentor, President's Faculty Award, and Distinguished Faculty. Throughout the state, she has been honored with the University System of Maryland Board. The Maryland Board of the Rangers Excellence in Mentoring, Maryland's top 100 women and leadership Maryland. Without further introduction, I invite both the speakers for today evening and look forward to the question and answer session at the end of the lectures.
Thank you.
Please welcome
So Brian Stiegler has actually agreed to let me speak first. Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction and this opportunity to be able to present with you today. Normally, I'm on the other side of the Zoom. I'm letting you in and muting you and managing the system. So it is great to be with you on this side, sharing some content. And I really look forward to the engagement that we'll have at the end. So today we're going to talk a little bit about professionalism in the liberal arts by focusing on some best practices in education that can also lead to employability and full person development. And so for my piece, I'm going to focus a bit on high impact practices, those educational opportunities where we can really invest a whole lot more and in return we get a lot out of them. And I'll focus a bit on internships as one example. And then Dr. Stiegler will focus on a wealth of opportunities in international education. And so high impact practices, or HIPs as they're sometimes called, are, as I said, where we have these opportunities in education to invest more, and in exchange, we get more in return. So in investment, we're probably putting more work in terms of time, thought, effort into something. We're not passive recipients of learning in the classroom. We're out and we're doing something that's really challenging us as people and thinkers. And then in exchange, the reward for that is ultimately we're going to understand the concepts and the material more. We're more motivated and feel more empowered in our own education, and ultimately in our leadership skills and how we apply those to the workplace and professional development. All of the photos that I'm showing here are actual examples of me and students in some high impact practices. So I just wanted to point those out. They're not Googled images. These are just some actual examples. And here we are with students who had registered to vote and had voted for the first time. So this lists some examples of what we mean by high impact practices. And so you can think about some of these, again, as I just will briefly touch upon them and we'll focus on a few to consider how you're doing them at PDEU. And I would advocate that we do all of these at Salisbury University. And so it will be interesting to share best practices with each other. So again, the idea is that you do something more challenging than you might in a standard classroom. One example would be first year seminars. So having all of the students who are coming into the institution doing something together that could be slightly different, but having some engagement and transition into this college experience. To some extent, we have been doing this at Salisbury University, and we've committed to doing this more systematically in our new general education that we've adopted. Beyond just first-year students, you can involve everyone in the university in common intellectual experiences. So this could be an example where we're all reading the same book, we're watching a TED Talk and having a discussion, we have a theme for the semester, so we're exploring things together as an intellectual community. We may have learning communities or living learning communities. So students might actually be living together as they're taking courses, or they might be organized in certain ways where they're learning in a cohort that allows them to continue those conversations and experiences outside of the classroom. Of course, we want to encourage writing intensive courses. We know that there's something about the process of exploring your learning and your ideas by writing, including drafting and learning that we're never going to get it right the first time. We're going multiple times, revisiting a project and really committing to that kind of long-term experience of thinking and communicating. We may engage in collaborative assignments and projects. So although students often lament having to work on teams, we know in our professional lives how often we have to work with other people. We're very often working in pairs or on teams. And so taking students through those experiences of teamwork is so valuable for them to understand how to work with the team and begin those leadership skills that they're going to need in their careers. Undergraduate research has become more and more prominent. At one point, typically research was saved for more advanced students, and we've really rethought that model in academia from day one, that students can be engaging in primary research, either alone or directed with a faculty mentor. Of course, we would include in high impact practices, diversity and global learning. And I will save that discussion really for Dr. Stiegler to explore some examples of international education. We engage in service learning or civic engagement, taking what we've learned to the community and then bringing those lessons back to class for that important reflective piece where we can have some time to process what we did and what we learned and making those connections. Internships are another high impact practice along that same vein of thinking. We want students to take the knowledge that they've learned from their academic experience, bringing that into a professional work environment, and then expanding upon those experiences, learning their strengths and weaknesses, deciding what they do or don't like in a career possibility. And again, then giving them opportunities to come back and reflect upon and showcase those experiences. And then finally, capstones or projects, the idea that at the end of your academic journey, you should be able to showcase that work into something significant. That could be an internship. It could be a thesis, again, involving some of these other high impact practices, an applied project in the community. And so one of the ideas is that although these are listed separately, they're really interconnected. And so I want to talk a bit about high impact practices and what they know they do for us. So it's going to take faculty more time to set these up. It's going to take students more time to do these than if they were simply reading something and taking a quiz. And so we would consider the benefits of doing this extra work. And so I'd like to look at some that are obvious and some that are less obvious. So engaging in the practices that I just shared with you, not surprisingly, are going to enhance our ability to communicate, to read, and to write. So we will be processing all sorts of information through any of those practices. Another great thing about these practices is that they engage both our right and left brain. So we are creative and innovative in many of these experiences, and at the same time, analytical and critical thinking. And we know in our professional lives how often we have to be creative and analytical together to solve problems. Having students engage in this type of way where they're really invested and active in their own learning helps with retention. Students are more likely to stay the course, improves chances of graduation and timely graduation, and interestingly is also coordinated with alumni giving, which makes sense if you think about it. If you're that invested and have these amazing experiences during your collegiate career, that you're going to feel connected to the institution and to give back. And these practices, in part, we do them because they're all connected to this topic for today, employability and having marketable skills. All of those things we mentioned certainly translate very concretely into the marketplace. And next, I want to focus on some less expected benefits, or to me, were surprising benefits until I really thought about them and they made sense. So we'd expect that students would gain writing and marketable skills. But we also see this building of resilience and relationships. And so I'd like to explore those a little bit. So while they're surprising at first blush, they really do make sense. So when we talk about resilience, we mean this idea that some things are really hard and we may feel frustration, but we know if you are stubborn and determined and have that sense of grit and determination, that you have an invaluable experience. So really committing to that purpose, finding your passion, doing hard things anyway because they need to be done is such a huge life lesson to develop a whole person and a professional. In a similar way, high impact practices really develop relationships. And so where you might think about taking a writing intensive course or doing civic engagement or international education, perhaps you wouldn't do those because of relationships. They really do strengthen them. So there's something about this camaraderie of going through an experience together as a cohort or engaging in these really challenging experiences. Mentorship is a huge component of this. We all need peer mentors and more advanced role models. And having this sense of accountability really matters. We often can perform well on our own, but sometimes we perform best when we're accountable to the group. And so I'm just going to explore those two concepts a little bit more because I do think they're really important, exciting takeaways for why we want to invest into these practices. And I'll give a couple of examples of some books that address this in case you're interested in more discussion or follow-up. So in Duckworth's book on grit, this idea of being gritty and determined, coming through this resiliency, one of the things she notes is that we tend to overestimate natural talent. So if we see someone who's amazing, we look at Suni Lee the gymnast and think, well, she just has this inborn natural talent. And to some extent, people who are amazing have natural talent, but we are really overestimating that. A lot more of this has to do with this idea of resilience or grit. So when we identify a purpose, then we practice it, we gain a skill, and that's just part of it. Then we really sort of go back to this, again, idea of purpose and this tenacity or resilience. As things get hard, there's a divide between the people who will quit and the people who just keep at it. The people who are resilient and tenacious will ultimately build that expertise. It's not just natural talent. A lot of it really is stubbornness. In a similar way with relationships, Duckworth notes that, again, we tend to overestimate people's internal drive to succeed. We all have a fire inside of us that's burning, that pilot light that keeps us going. But in reality, we tend to do better with others. So this sense of accountability, if we're doing it for the team, we don't want to disappoint our mentors, our role models, we're going to perform better. So rather than kind of this overestimation of the lone hero doing things, getting people together in these high impact practices seems to be a better course. Looking at this in a really different way is David Ebstein in his book, Range. So he really sort of pushes back some of the things that Duckworth says in her book, Grit, but really kind of getting at the same ideas. So looking at resilience, though, he says there's a certain point where you need to know when to say when. In other words, there is a certain wisdom to knowing when to stop. And just pushing through something for the sake of pushing through and not quitting isn't necessarily the best answer. So the way he puts it is that it may be less about grit than about fit. How well do we fit in these certain roles that we're going to be asked to play out in our lives? And so here's where something like an internship can be extremely valuable, or having these experiences where we know if something is not a good fit for us. Learning that we don't want to do something is just as important as learning what we want to do. In terms of relationships, Ebstein really challenges us not to just give lip service, but to really commit to doing this. And we know if something doesn't end up on our schedule, we're not going to do it. And so he advocates that we actually schedule time, blocking out time on our calendar and space. We need to have these creative spaces where we go, where we can interact with different people of as far-ranging disciplines as we can. So really stretching our networks to the breaking point. Working with people whose work seems maybe like it's not in line with ours, and then challenging ourselves by making these connections creatively where it wouldn't necessarily seem that we would have these, and really getting way out of our comfort zone as much as we're willing to. One last thing about this idea of relationships and resiliency is in some work that I've done about leadership, development, and identity. And so the evidence really does bear out the same idea that we need to have as many experiences as possible to develop us as professionals, as leaders, as people. And in this model, it looks really complex, but if you just look down the rings, you'll see that we need to develop this sense over as many different systems or contexts as possible. So we don't want to have just one high impact practice. We don't want to have just one mentor. We don't want to have just one of any of these things. We want to explore our leadership and development as many contexts as possible, from the really intimate, personal out to the whole culture. And we want to do this over time as many times as possible. In this model, again, you'll see that relationships really proved to be a driving force in how people could develop this sense of identity as a leader, as well as, again, this idea of the purpose being so important. Our purpose and calling and passion really will drive us. And then identity development, how we see ourselves and how others see us and how we're able to shape that view. And so these ideas really do resonate and ring true about the value of this type of work. Very briefly, I just want to mention internships as an example, and we're happy to share this PowerPoint with you, which is hyperlinked here to our website, and happy to share that as well. In the Fulton School of Liberal Arts, we are dedicated to all of the high impact practices. All of our 12 departments have internships. In addition, we have internships that are across disciplines and engaged with particular programs as well. So students have the opportunity to participate in a program called the Washington Center, where they are active for a semester in Washington, D.C., doing an internship, taking a seminar, and doing professional development. They can participate in global experiences where they do an internship out of the U.S. and other opportunities as well. And so this website, if you were to click on this hyperlink or the one that I share with you, would take you to a link for students that helps them get connected to all of these high impact practices. In addition, we have internship fairs every semester where students can connect and learn how to do this by getting a lot of help. And so to summarize my section and pass it over to my colleague, one of the things I want you to take away is that we want to do this as often as possible. So we want to use many high impact practices. It's not that you just pick one and it works and go with it. To integrate as many of these as possible into students' education for their professional development. This has to be over time. It's not a one-shot case study. So this is happening throughout our entire development in as many of these contexts as we can connect with. And so it could be happening on a personal level, in a public level, all over, should be all of those. And looking at these diverse influences, especially as we try to diversify the workforce and leadership, really focusing on what gives people a sense of purpose, building those relationships, and helping them identify themselves as a leader or a professional. To sum it all up, quoting a colleague, so you give students something that they can't do, or at least they think they can't do, and they work really hard at it until they find they can do it, and then you just keep going back and doing that again. So just pushing that envelope for growth over and over again. And so that concludes my piece. And I, again, share my contact information with you. I'm happy to share the slides and links with you as well. And I will turn it over to Dr. Stiegler. Thank you.
So my comments are going to build upon everything that Dr. Egan has just said about high impact practices. Let me start my context, my portion with a little bit of larger context about liberal arts education, first globally and then in the United States. It is generally the case in the history of Western higher education that the tradition of liberal arts education, which sort of founded the whole thing, has over the course of the last several generations declined in favor of more professional education. Outside the United States, this has really been a dominant trend. Engineering and medicine and law and architecture and education and these things have swamped the liberal arts in higher education. Inside the United States, we have been able for a while to hold back that tide, but increasingly we're losing that battle. And the liberal arts is increasingly in doubt as a valuable thing to pursue in higher education. There's two negative outcomes in the United States higher education context of this trend. One is that higher education has been increasingly defunded by public states and at the national level in favor of a perception of higher education as a private good. Higher education is not a public good that should be invested in by the public, but it's a private good that will result in higher wages for the individual student in their career, and therefore should be paid for by the student. This has then in turn resulted in great debt loads, financial debt loads for students, and therefore, and here's the second big negative consequence, is that there's an increasing lack of confidence in the US culture in higher education as a valid and valuable thing for young people to do. Because it results in debt, and is it really worth it, right? So within these contexts, I want to start by showing you 4 or 5 models of how institutions, higher education institutions who really have defined themselves in the liberal arts, how they're fighting back against this trend. And then I'm going to give you one set of data, and we're going to end with a little video video from a student about how the Fulton School of Liberal Arts at Salisbury University is doing the same thing, is fighting back against this trend. So here we go. Next one, Donna, there we go. Here are 4 private liberal arts colleges, all of them very well renowned in the US higher education system, and each one has a unique feature about this professionalization of the liberal arts that's worthy of mention. First one I think is Goucher College. Goucher is located here in the state of Maryland. It was the first and is still one of the few liberal arts colleges in the country that requires that all students study abroad as part of the undergraduate curriculum. Because many students at Goucher study abroad multiple times during the career, Goucher ultimately has a study abroad participation rate above 100%. More than 100% of their students study abroad during their undergraduate career. This is unique in US. It's actually not unique. There are 2 liberal arts colleges in the country that can say that about their student, but it's a very special relationship that they have with that particular type of high impact practice as Dr. Egan defined them. The next one, what's the next one I put here? The Wheaton Edge. Wheaton College is up in Massachusetts. They've branded this thing called the Wheaton Edge. Much like as Dr. Egan defined the different types of high impact practices, Wheaton College likewise tries to do a variety of challenges, but of strategies to professionalize these liberal arts degrees. But one of the things that they've gotten the most attention for is guaranteeing funding for students to take unpaid professional internships in the summer if they cannot afford to take off from paid low-skill college jobs, waiting tables, or whatever they would do in the summer, so that the students can do a summer internship. So this guaranteed funding for students to have a summer internship is the unique feature of the Wheaton Edge that otherwise looks a lot like what Dr. Egan has described. I think St. Rose was next. The College of St. Rose did an interesting thing. One of the high impact practices that Dr. Egan mentioned was this capstone type of experience, undergraduate research. This is actually very classical within the English majors, right? Not at all unexpected for English majors to have a big thesis or creative project at the end. And that has always been a characteristic of the College of St. Rose up in New York, their English major. But about a decade ago, their English major also began requiring an internship. So now all English majors have to do an internship in order to graduate from that degree. They cannot do otherwise, right? The idea being that being an English major is in fact a compelling preparation for any number of career fields. So it's just a question of transitioning you into career fields in addition to doing that research project or creative project that is more academic in nature as a terminal experience. Fairfield University is a Jesuit a college in the Jesuit tradition up in Connecticut. It not only offers credits for liberal arts students to participate in international internships, and this is going to be my way to transition to the one research project that I want to tell you about here at the Fulton School at Salisbury University. But about 3 years ago, they took on the responsibility to transcript the internships, the global experiences internships that we'll talk about in just a minute, not just for its own students at Fairfield University, but for any student in an American university who wants to do one of these internships. So when Salisbury University students do these internships that we're about to talk about in a minute, we offer that credit ourselves, right? That's our home credit. But many liberal arts students in other universities around the United States, their colleges have not figured out how to do this. And so Fairfield University will offer the transcripts so that any liberal arts major and at any college in the United States can do one of these internships that we're about to talk about. And this makes Fairfield University unique in this idea of professionalizing the liberal arts. So now let's look at the Fulton School. So generally speaking, in American higher education, the undergraduate career looks generally the same. State by state, it might vary in certain ways, but generally it looks like this. In American higher education, everyone has to do something that we call general education, some math course, history course, science course, some general studies, right? That tends to be about a third of your curriculum at the undergraduate major. Then everybody has to do a major in something. And this is again where the liberal arts majors perhaps have fallen over the last couple generations to these more professional majors. People prefer to major in engineering or architecture or medicine, pre-medicine or pre-law, something like that, instead of a liberal arts major. But that major tends to be anywhere in the liberal arts, it tends to be about a third of that degree, which means there's an extra third still that can be made up of something else. So in American higher education, often for a liberal arts major, that extra third means a second major. That's not at all uncommon. Often it is a minor area or a secondary area of study. Often a liberal arts student maybe took a little bit of time to decide what that first area of study was going to be and might have been inefficient in the use of those credits. And that's where some of that goes. But in all cases, the idea here that I'm about to talk about, and it's just one of these high impact practices that Dr. Egan sketched out to begin with, is to create an opportunity for liberal arts students to have a high impact off-campus experiential learning experience that is a full semester at length, right? So in our context here in Salisbury University, the big professional programs that prepare students for careers at our institution are education, social work, nursing, accounting, for example, is another one, exercise science, respiratory therapy. These are big majors that are professionalized and result in licensure and professional on-ramps for students. All of these majors have 1/8 of the undergraduate career, one full semester of the 8 of the undergraduate career dedicated to that professional experience, that clinical internship experiences, all of them. But in the liberal arts, that's not a common practice, right? Maybe a course here, maybe an activity there. What about a full semester of experience? So a liberal arts students can likewise have a terminal capstone experience that is a full semester in nature. So here we go. Next one, Donna. So, I just did that. So here's 3. So here's 4 of the ones that we talked about. Dr. Egan mentioned the Washington Center, right in our nation's capital, which is located about, well, depending on the traffic, it's really 2 hours to the edge of Washington, D.C. from our campus, and about an hour to get from the edge into the middle, right? Because of traffic. You know how that goes, right? Semester study abroad programs, these international internships that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And just this year, we joined an organization called the National Student Exchange, which is going to allow students to spend from Salisbury University to spend 1 whole semester at another college or university, one of 150 college or universities in another state, someplace else in our large and diverse country, to give students that opportunity of engagement and integration. So the internship is what I'm going to show you, this little piece of research that comes out of a pilot study that we did from 2012 to 2018. So Global Experiences is an organization. It's part of the larger not-for-profit called the American Institute for Foreign Studies, and they place students in internships in places like London and Dublin and Barcelona and Florence and Milan and Sydney, San Jose, Costa Rica, like that. Okay, these internships are available to students from any major, including any liberal arts major. And so then the idea is that those credits for that major, for that internship, can count towards a major. That's possible. Because as Dr. Egan described, in the Fulton School, all of the majors have some sort of an internship type credit, but it can also count in that top third, right? On top of general studies, on top of the major, there's that third extra. It can count in there. In either case, it moves the students towards degree to give the students the opportunity to do this big internship. Now, the thing that's unique about this international internship, in addition to the fact that it's international, is that if you're going to go all the way to London, you don't do a 100-hour internship, right? These are big 400-hour, 12-week internships, right? So maybe the more common model, certainly in the business school, the more common model is a 3-credit, one course internship. In the Fulton School, that's also a more common model. A smaller internship, you do it on the side while you're doing your other classes. This is a full-time work experience because you've flown all the way to wherever you've flown to, right? So it's going to be a full-time experience. So that's what we did. And here's the data that when we looked at, next one there. There we go. Here's the data that when we looked at this, how we did from 2013 to 2018. We had 71 students participate in this program over that period. 100% of the students graduated. That's not terribly surprising because they did it at the end of their career anyway, right? So that's not terribly surprising. We were able to collect career data on 65 of the 71 participant alumni, which is a 91% response rate. And that is worthy of comment just in and of itself. Any of you who do field research like this, to get a 91% response rate is remarkable. And I could explain to you how we did that. And it's actually it's an outcome of the professionalization of liberal arts. 100% of those alumni, of those 71 students, were in full-time jobs. 3.1 months after graduation was the average time to first hire. 61% of the program alumni were working in the Washington, D.C. Or Maryland metropolitan economy, here serving in our region. 30% of the alumni were working outside of the United States, outside of the Washington, D.C. or Maryland economy, but inside the United States. They went to New York, or they went to California, or someplace else in the United States. And 9% of the alumni were working overseas. All of these alumni, these 71, came from either the Fulton School or the College of Health and Human Services. In the College of Health and Human Services, there were only two majors that participated. One was public health, and the other was exercise science. So of these 71, I don't have that data exactly here in this data set, how many of them were from the Fulton School, but it was about 70% of those students were from the Fulton School. So as a narrative to counteract this creeping narrative over the last several generations of the need for higher education to prepare you for the workforce, and therefore the need to flee from the liberal arts to engineering and architecture and pre-medicine and pre-law and education and all these other things. The evidence from this sampling with a 91% return rate, really a sizable return rate, is that if you want a guaranteed job, major in the liberal arts and spend and do a full semester transitional work experience. All right. And this is only the first stop, right? This is your first job out of college. This doesn't track where you're going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, which is where Dr. Egan's point about the foundations of character, right, that these high impact practices develop end up contributing to a long-term success, not only professionally, but as a citizen and as a whole person. Right, these are first-time stops. So Jack A is an example. And we're going to watch a little video here. It's about a 5-minute video that Jack A contributed for us. He spent his last semester interning in London. He was a communication major. He only earned 4 of his credits towards his communication major. The other 8 credits he earned for his internship, he counted in that top third, right? That could be anything else, right? So it helped him get towards degree, but they just counted as free electives. And then we'll find out after the video what Jack A is doing now. So Donna, if you just click on that picture of Jack A, it should open up the YouTube site, I hope.
And Dr. Stiegler, it's actually Chrys who's doing this.
Oh, it's Chrys.
Let me all know, are you seeing the YouTube screen? I may have to switch my share. Are you seeing the slides or YouTube?
We're seeing slides still.
Okay, then I will stop that share and reshare. Okay.
Just make sure you share sound.
Okay, now you should see YouTube. Is that right?
You got it.
Okay.
You booked
And
we got sound. Perfect.
The kitchen where.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name's Jay. I'm from Salisbury University. I'm a video editing intern doing an internship here in London through Global Experiences, and I'll be taking over the Snapchat today. Just a little bit about me. I'm a second semester senior, so once I'm done here, I'm out. What else? I'm doing my internship with Jungle Creations. It's based in like the center of London, and for me, that's about an hour commute. So I got to get going. So follow me, and you'll get to see what it's like to be an intern in London for today. So I'm now at the jungle office. We have the luxury of having a full kitchen in the back corner, so I like to get here like 15 minutes early and make some breakfast.
I'm not sure what happened with the video.
It was good. It just freezes on that. It's a still image of that video. So I just push
Oh.
play again. It was going okay.
Okay. I think we're not there any longer.
Oh no. I'm gonna have to listen to another commercial again. Maybe if we go back to the slide and click on the link again, it'll relaunch and we can just forward back to where we were. So as we wander back into that space again.
So as an intern here at Jungle.
Okay.
Oh, we're back.
My job is a video editor, which basically means that I have to source content on the internet to make videos off of, and then make quick little 3-minute clips of them after I script them and put them out onto our different social media platforms. As an intern, I'm testing the waters in all the different fields that we make content for, but everyone here at the table has their own little specific area. And I think some of them actually kind of want to tell you what's going on. So it was a bit rainy outside, but the walk was worth it because we got some nice high quality British cuisine. So what is it called? Subway? Subway, yeah. Not like the trains though. It's very different because they call that the tube here. Now we may have just finished lunch, but here at Jungle, we always appreciate some nice leisure. All right, everybody. I'm now in the Twisted London studio. This is where they do all the little food projects and stuff for our Twisted page. And I'm going to let the people behind the magic explain to you what's going on here.
So today we've got Sophie making some Guinness chicken wings for St. Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's Day, yeah.
That'll be going out live on Sunday, and that's just an example of us working reactively to cultural occasions, but day in, day out, we make videos on these stations. And yeah, that's my speaker today.
All right, guys. So before I finish off my day, I pulled my manager aside. His name is Adam. He's just going to give you guys a quick insight on what my department actually is that I work in.
Hi guys, my name's Adam and I am the manager of the social video team. As a part of our team, we create video content for one of the top 5 most viewed media publishers in the world online. Jay's role as an intern, he creates videos day to day and puts them out across our communities, which make up to about 80 million followers. Hope you enjoyed our look around Jungle Creations today. Thank you.
Say bye, Liam.
Bye, mate. Hope you had a lovely day.
All right, guys, I'm back in my dorm now, so that'll be all for me today. I hope you enjoyed following me along and getting an inside look as to what it's like to be an intern here in London, specifically for video editing. I highly recommend going abroad, whether it's for class or for work, just because you learn way more than what you would in your regular learning environment. Even if it's your last semester, you should still go for it. It's my last semester right now. So once I go back home, I'll graduate, but this has been a perfect segue into going into the working world. And I feel ready already. So again, thank you for following along. Hope you learned something, and definitely go with global experiences if you're looking to go abroad. Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name's Jay. I'm from
Thank you, Dr. Egan.
Yeah.
So as we get the slideshow back in for just a minute here, think about all the things that Dr. Egan talked about in the first half of the presentation. These the grit that and the creativity that these high impact practices develop, right? So this young person from Eastern Maryland spent his full semester working in London, right? He had to learn how to manage the tube, get to work every day. He produced these videos that were uploaded. He worked in a professional environment, and he learned how to manage himself and his work opportunity, all based on what he had learned during his first 7 semesters in his liberal arts degree here in the communication department here at Salisbury University in the Fulton School of Liberal Arts. Today, Jack is the director of communications for a not-for-profit organization here in Maryland. And let me go back real quick as in conclusion to let you know how I even know this part. The reason we were able to get 91% return rate on these surveys of the students is that part of what the students who do that full semester global experience do is that organization helps place them in their internships abroad, helps them to create their first LinkedIn pages and begin to craft their first professional online identity. And at the same time, scrub away some of their online identity, which is probably not terribly professional anymore, right? As a result, we have their LinkedIn content, right? So one of the things that is a challenge always with universities is how to know what happens with our students after they graduate, right? Well, this particular cohort of students, we have all of their LinkedIn content. And so we can just go and look at their LinkedIn page and see what they're up to, right? And this is how we got 91% return rate on those for those 71 students, because we had access to all their LinkedIn pages. We could tell exactly where they were and what they were doing and when they started their jobs. And Jack, this is his second job out. He's been out since 2019. This is already his second job, and he's already a director of communications. I think we're done. So reinventing professionalism with liberal arts in the current times. For questions for Dr. Egan or for myself. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Egan and Professor Brian. It was indeed an enlightening session in many ways. We'll talk about it as a briefing, but before that, I request all the participants to kindly come in with the questions. Yes, Professor Weber, he's having a question, please.
Thank you. Okay, fine. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, Professor Brian and Chrys, for your wonderful presentations. We got to know a lot about what's happening at your end, especially in the context of liberal arts. I just had one point when I was just going through your presentations. You know, there is a debate going on throughout these decades. It's not like just now, decades. Knowledge as a means to some ulterior ends that we want to achieve, that you rightly stated in terms of the utilitarian goals that education is aiming at. On the other hand, we have this liberal arts coming from our classical traditions, starting from Cicero, Seneca, and Newman, and our own period, Michael Oxford, McIntyre. All of them have stated that knowledge, and especially liberal arts knowledge, should be attained for its own sake, rather than some ulterior motives or some other ends. Somehow we keep talking about all these things in principles, but when it comes to practice, we are more motivated and inspired toward how we are going to be useful for some other kind of ends, be it materialistic or whatever else. How to bridge this gap? Because talks are there, both in Europe and US, but somehow there is no such action. People keep talking about, sometimes they talk in terms of the cognitive framework, sometimes utilitarian framework. Look at Bloom's taxonomy. That has to be applied, that was meant for the science education somewhere. We have just taken it as it is for our liberal arts also, even though we know that it has no affective or psychomotor context, and it was flop basically toward the end. Nobody talk about it. Everybody talked about only cognitive framework, and we are simply taking it as if it is the final statement for liberal arts. I think the biggest challenge for all of us across the globe is to bridge this gap. And I just want to know if you can talk something about how we can initiate a state where we can say that knowledge, especially in the context of liberal arts, has to be pursued for its own sake, rather than some ulterior motives that we keep talking about in different presentations. Thanks if you could say something about this.
Thank you. And Brian, you may need to keep yourself unmuted. Oh, there you go. Great. I agree with you. And I feel like this discussion series has come full circle. So if you remember, the first session was with our colleague Martin Paraboom, really addressing this issue on the liberal arts. And as you're asking your question, I'm thinking of a presentation that he has to give all of the time to admitted students and their parents. So if they've been accepted into the university, they come for a visit, decide, are they going to sign up, right? Are they coming here? And this really is, I think, the tension, but it could be kind of a creative, fabulous tension, right? So in part, I think people are drawn to these disciplines for the love of knowledge. I studied philosophy just because I loved it. I didn't believe necessarily it was going to lead to my career. And so I think there's something in that that's very appealing to people to have knowledge for knowledge's sake. But it seems like with each growing year, there's more and more pragmatism. And I'm not sure how much of that is the students, how much of that is their parents, as we think about the investment of time and money and resources into higher education. But I agree with you. There's definitely this tension between knowledge for knowledge's sake and just developing yourself as a whole person and a critical thinker and having marketable skills, and these majors with the profession in the title that clearly indicate what your next step is. And so I'll stop there, but I'm with you. I think we're in a really interesting place with this.
I think it's like what Alan Bloom also stated in his The Closing of the American Mind. I mean, people are talking about, it's not like the discussion is not going on, but what are liberal arts institutions doing across the globe? I think every time we get trapped into all those kind of narratives when we talk about, okay, how will students link to their professionalism? And interestingly, your titles, today's presentation title was Reinventing Professionalism. So are we again looking at the same ends that that's how the liberal arts education has been pursuing since long? Or do we have something really serious about it to think about in terms of rethinking liberal arts education, especially in the 21st century? And one more thing, like you see that entire classical revival is happening. Just problem is that how to meet your modern standards, modern frameworks with the classical frameworks. Possibly we can come up with some collaboration in future. That would be an interesting discussion, I believe.
I would only suggest, and perhaps this is an American thing for me to say, is to not discount guerrilla warfare, right? The argument of the liberal arts and the growth of the mind and wisdom is an argument that we've lost. We're losing. We've been losing for at least 2 generations, maybe longer. So if we're losing, you know, if we can get students to continue to study the liberal arts because that's actually a good way to prepare for a career and a professional life, they're still studying the liberal arts, right? So if we're losing the traditional battle, I'm all for guerrilla warfare. change the narrative, right? But then let's change the narrative. Certainly our experience at our public regional university, which is very much, and in the United States system, right? Dr. Perryboom will speak eloquently at a drop of a hat about the training of citizens, right? And Thomas Jefferson's sort of ideal vision of we've got the two largest democracies in the world here, right? That the necessity for this sort of knowledge and wisdom among the citizenry. But public regional universities like ours function to serve our province, right? To create workers for our province. And so what we see repeatedly is that a student will be a nursing major and will become a nurse. 5 years after graduation, most of those people are not nurses anymore, right? They've moved on to do something else. Same thing is true with education majors. Same thing is true of accounting majors, right? These professional degrees end up evolving into interesting, fascinating lives for interesting, fascinating peoples, right? But we lose the battle at 18 years old. You know, we've already lost in that sense, right? So I'm all for the guerrilla warfare. I think we ought to go toe to toe with the professional programs and say, if you want to be employed, right? If you want a career, if you want to invest in yourself, invest this way. But then again, our academic structure, the number of hours and credits and, you know, what we do at universities, which is validate learning, right, through mechanics, right, ought to build into it the opportunity for these sorts of professionalized programs for liberal arts majors, just the way we do it for nursing majors and social work majors and teaching majors and all the others, right? And then we win all the same. The students still get the same curriculum. That same curriculum that teaches those noble things from the classic tradition that you identified.
Very interesting. I'll jump in between here so that we can take up some more questions. But yes, definitely, I think what has been presented as a interesting perspective and the way both Professor Egan as well as Professor Brian has summarized and enlightened, it makes a lot of sense. In fact, today morning only I was discussing with my students, master psychology students, about a movie which is into the wild, and there a very interesting quote I think has been mentioned, which says that careers are invention of 20th century. So when we talk about liberal arts particularly, I think even in Indian context, because that will be very interesting for you all to frame in, there is something called a synthesis, which we call in Sanskrit as manthan. And the symbolic to liberal art is in reference to manthan, which is basically to see that a lot of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach in some way, when they get entangled, what comes out is not something pre-designed. Rather, it is something what exactly Professor Brian is saying, that, you know, you may start your career as a nurse, but after 5 years, you evolve as an individual, and that can be something very unique, which is coming alongside your lived experience and the qualification which one has taken in. So I think it's very nicely placed in. I was very keen to understand, Professor Brian, from you, there was mentioning of transitional work experience, which you mentioned while you were sharing your insights about the internship framework. If you can please throw some light on it.
I would say that for as much as Dr. Egan talked about these sort of character formation activities that all these high impact practices deliver, that in what I call a transitional work experience, meaning within the undergraduate career structure, right, but a work environment, I see a great difference between doing a 10-hour-a-week internship and doing a full-time internship. 20-year-olds often don't own enough socks or shoes to go to work every day, right? I mean, it's one thing to work 2 days a week for 2 hours at a time. It's something entirely different to go to work 5 days a week. that's different. And an education major, when they've been in their classroom their senior year for the entire semester, practicing as a teacher, they start to take on the identity as a teacher. Same thing is true of a nurse. So when a liberal arts major doesn't get that chance to put on professional clothing, to have a badge with their identity on it and go into a professional environment and practice at being a professional within the academic structure, they then end their academic experience perhaps unprepared for the next thing, right? Now they have a whole lifetime of grit, right, and creativity that they're going to have to rely on, and as we were saying before, that classical training, that's the reason that it was there. That's the reason it came up that way, right? Because of the knowledge and the wisdom that comes from it, right? But how do you transition the person to their next stage of life, especially these traditional age students who are 21 years old, right, who are still learning how to engage in the world, right? They're not going to go back to daddy's farm, most of them. They got to go out into that workforce. And I think it's really a compelling opportunity that these professional programs give to teach students how to be workers, how to be professionals. And I think the liberal arts has the space within the curriculum to allow them to do that too. But it's just not our tradition really to do it.
I think, yes, again, it goes in line exactly with what recently Professor Dave and I was trying to put a piece of concept note together, and then we came across a very interesting World Economic Forum rating where they said that in time ahead by 2025, top 10 skills which will be expected from the youngsters will include critical thinking, problem solving, skills related to self-management, and a lot to do with what in Indian context we say global, having a global understanding, but still having a local orientation. And that perfectly blends with what you have mentioned. In fact, that's exactly is the base of the Center for Critical Thinking at the School of Liberal Studies, which we are just in the initial stage to nurture. And thanks to this global lecture series, because that's also a part of the same initiative which we have tried placing and situating. So certainly, I think the two aspects which come to my understanding and what I'm able to gather, the high impact practice is exactly what Professor Egan was trying to mention with reference to how a curricula which has so much more to offer beyond what we can simply say as a predefined skill sets or predefined levels of learning. I think when it is about amalgamation of liberal arts program, it is something where the framework designing cannot be done in advance, because there is an evolution which comes as a part of overall learning experience. I request Professor Nigam Dave if you want to opine something on this, and then maybe a few comments from Professor Martin also, so that we can have a good circling in terms of conclusion, and then we can probably conclude. I also request participants, if they have any questions, they can unmute themselves, or they can also place the questions in the chat box. Professor Nigam Dave, so if you can opine.
No, I don't have any comments to make. It's always good to know what the sailors in the other ships are doing. So we in India are trying to implement our own version of liberal arts or liberal studies. And it is wonderful to understand from our partners the type of best practices and the next practices that they are implementing. So it was a moment of learning for us as well. So thank you very much, all the speakers, and Professor Martin, your perspective would help us understand it better.
All right, thank you. Going back to Professor Vaivav's initial question, I'd say the factor that's intervened to sort of challenge us on that notion of the traditional liberal arts education is the democratization of higher education, the opening up of higher education to a wider swath of the population, and ideally to anyone who can benefit from it, anyone who has the curiosity and the ability to be successful in terms of an undergraduate career in this case, really should have that opportunity. And I think that often means that we do have to think more thoughtfully and creatively and intentionally about the professional piece of it. In other words, we don't want to sell liberal education short, in other words, right? Absolutely. I have benefited from my liberal education. I look ahead to future chapters in my life where I can just sit and read and continue to feed the curiosity that I've developed over a lifetime of learning. So that personal piece is incredibly important, but for many, the professional piece is not a given. And I think traditionally those who went to those little liberal arts colleges in the Northeast of the US were the sons, more often than not, of privilege, who didn't really have to worry about professionalization because it was kind of done for them. That's what privilege was all about. So I think that's why we've been talking about how the professionalization is so very, very important, that this really means that liberal education is something that is in the best interest of that first generation student, or those who've traditionally been shut out of the opportunities that higher education have to afford. And then the other point that I'll make before I be quiet is that I think that the pressing needs of our time, when we think about the challenges that we face in terms of achieving greater diversity, equity, and inclusion in our society at large, or addressing the threats to democracy that exist around the world, and we think about the overall pressing challenge of climate change. This requires people who are not just trained to be in a particular profession, but who have the curiosity and the creativity to look at the world and to think innovatively, think creatively, think with love, right? Informed by a solid ethical foundation about the challenges that face us, and being willing to maybe cling to the things that are good about our traditions, but at the same time break out of those to really take on some major challenges and come up with some significantly creative solutions to these massive challenges that face us. And I think liberal education still and uniquely equips us for that lifetime of challenge. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Professor Nigam Dave and Professor Martin, for your valuable input. In fact, such discussions should not be time bound, because the more you churn, the more you receive in terms of interpretation, analysis, and the essence goes more richer. I am greatly thankful to our partner university, Salisbury University, who has not just taken this initiative in the time of pandemic with global lecture series, but also with 2 online programs which we could successfully manage in the second wave of pandemic, which was really bad in India, and likewise in the similar way across the globe, where we could enlighten students with caste system as one of the course, which was done as a collaborative initiative, season 1 and season 2 both. And there was a great amount of learning through the discussion boards which the professors were trying to instill. All the 3 lectures which we could plan in format which as a team we felt can definitely be a good ground to trigger thinking and to make all the youngsters become more curious with reference to what is relevant in today's context, and how that can be taken forward with different kinds of arms which will come in form of skill sets or approaches which will be relevant to them. And very important thing, and I always believe the most important thing which Professor Martin mentioned, which is about ethics and values, because that is something which goes as an offering from us as a generation which is different to the youngsters who are trying to understand and take this whole idea forward. On that note, I thank everyone today who has gathered as participant, professors and students from both the universities, and all the speakers for their valuable time. And we look forward to many more such sessions. And thank you so much again, Professor Martin, Professor Egan, Professor Brian, for your efforts today with reference to what we think is just the beginning in terms of giving a redefined meaning to professionalism with reference to liberal arts. On that note, I hand over the session back to Professor Chrys and request her to conclude and close the day.
Sure, and we want to extend our thanks to everyone at PDEU and especially Dr. Ritu for organizing all of this and really having the vision to bring us together for these discussions. So thank you very much. I shared a few things that I hope you can see in the chat. I shared a link and then our PowerPoint. And again, you're welcome to follow up with us. I agree with you that the conversations need to continue in whatever way we're able to. I think we've hit upon rich material here. And so again, we're very thankful. Dr. Stiegler and I genuinely enjoyed putting this work together. We are excited to collaborate and to share. And I don't know if you care to add anything else, Brian.
Just thank you for the opportunity to be with you. It's a real privilege.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Martin sir from OIR PDU for coordinating everything.
Enjoy your evening.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Till next time.